we'll go on to the next talk in our schedule, which is Antonino Salmeri and Jessica Schingler, implementation strategies for a coordinated lunar resource evaluation campaign compatible with international space law and promoting positive policy precedents.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Antonino Salmeri, and together with my colleague Jessica Schingler, we are delighted to present you these slides on behalf of the Open Lunar Foundation. As Clive already brilliantly summarized, today we're going to talk about implementation strategies for a coordinated lunar resource evaluation campaign. And once again, I'd like to commend Clive and the other organizers for this initiative, which we think is extremely timely and that we would love to support at the best of our abilities. What we will do in this presentation is exploring initial ideas on how to design a campaign that complies with the Outer Space Treaty and promotes the development of positive policy precedents, a subject that is very dear to our heart at the Open Lunar Foundation. We will do that beginning by a short overview of the legal and policy context shaping the conduct of a coordinated resource evaluation campaign. And then we will go into some of our suggestions, 3 of them, at least the most relevant for this session. And then we will conclude and hopefully take any question and then have a very interesting discussion, I'm sure, during the panel later on together with Gabriel as well. To begin with, I'm not going to go too much into details. Don't worry, the lawyer is not going to really dive too much into the law. But it is important to know that the conduct of a coordinated resource evaluation campaign has to be conducted, and it is conducted within a certain legal environment. Among the many different legal principles that will apply and will influence this campaign, the most relevant boundary conditions in this phase, when we're talking about design of a campaign, come from 6 articles of the Outer Space Treaty, which, as you all know, is the most important source of international space law. The first group of boundary condition comes from Articles 2 and 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, and they deal essentially with what we can summarize as inclusiveness and neutrality. In order to comply with principles such as the sharing of benefits in the exploration and use of outer space and the non-appropriation of space, there has to be mechanisms to keep those articles alive and implemented. Article 3 and 4 are also important for the coordinated campaign because they deal with the importance of international cooperation and the exclusively peaceful purposes shaping conduct of activities on the moon. And these principles are actually quite easy in this case because we do not have any military activity involved in the campaign, at least I hope not. And any international cooperation is certainly one of the defining features that I think will be kept in mind. And finally, Article 9 and Article 11 of the Outer Space Treaty oppose the most interesting boundary conditions because we still do not have clear mechanisms on how to implement them. And so this campaign will also be an opportunity to reflect on how do we pay due regard and how do we share information and data, most importantly. Aside to this boundary condition, we have an opportunity for precedent setting and hopefully positive precedent setting, beginning with the operationalization of these key provisions of the Outer Space Treaty, which has never been attempted for the moon in this particular context. And the same goes with the implementation of the long-term sustainability guidelines on outer space activities, which you for sure know, again, have never been demonstrated and implemented in the context of lunar activities. And overall, everything that this campaign will do will serve as a blueprint for lunar resource and for lunar and space resources governance also in other celestial bodies. Now, from this context, we derived 3 suggestions. The first one is the potential usefulness of structuring the campaign as an international joint venture. And why we think that? The first reason is that the international character of the campaign will be critical to comply with the boundary conditions that I just summarized. And the second one is that this particular structure of a joint venture can enable micro-cooperation a la carte, as we say, with the goal of increasing efficiency and reducing cost. As Clive said, there is a lot of ground to cover. There are different data sets that can be generated, and there are a lot of, let's say, incremental goals that can be pursued. That's why the structure of an international joint venture can be quite fit for the purpose of the campaign. And in fact, this joint venture can be designed around incremental goals, as the campaign will naturally be, because there's going to be a series of mission building on one another, not just one single comprehensive effort, but a series of them. This allows also for the participation of developing countries and non-primary space actors by the possibility of chiming in with smaller contribution that will still serve the purpose of the campaign without burdening them with high cost or high technology requirements. To meet the fundamental neutrality criteria, the suggestion is to base participation in the campaign and contribution upon objective selection criteria, and then to entrust the actual coordination and matching of this contribution to what we call a neutral trusted broker. So a third party that will be mediating among the different actors contributing to the campaign and engaging with them in contributions. This will avoid any politicization that can happen if the coordination is entrusted to a specific entity, again, assuming that we want to be more international. Suggestion number 2 goes into the heart of the campaign, which is what is going to be the data policy. And with Jesse and our colleagues at the Open Lunar Foundation, we thought of multi-purpose data policies. Again, this will be primarily for 3 reasons. The first one is to demonstrate pragmatic ways of benefit sharing. Most people talking about benefit sharing with resources, they think about monetary sharing. But as we know, the first concrete result will be data. And so experimenting with how do we share data will have a critical importance. This will also help build trust and reduce potential for conflict and set a positive trend for future mission engaging in lunar exploration. Again, building up on the structure of the campaign that Clive already summarized, this is in a way easy to implement because the campaign will already produce different data sets. So it is about managing these data sets in an incremental manner and granting access to this data based on the contributions. Also to engage and facilitate active participation. So you participate to a certain level of the campaign, you get full access to a certain amount of data, without forgetting that there has to be a separate data set for public distribution, so for open access. And again, if we want to engage the participation of commercial actors, this distinction between the actual mission data sets and a separate data set for public distribution can help solve the intellectual property rights and commercial interest questions in a pragmatic and flexible way. Suggestion number 3 deals with standards, and I'm so happy that Carlos will be able to talk about the LORs, which is one of my favorite projects personally in this field. The importance of standard goes without saying. Again, the benefit of developing shared standards for lunar evaluation and prospecting are many. And the most important ones will be feeding national and international regulatory processes. As we know, also the National Space Council now is looking for input exactly on these topics. And so a campaign conducted in this area will provide the starting point for better regulation at this level. But moreover, it will create confidence for investments by knowing that space resources and lunar resources will be explored and prospected in an agreed way by all the major actors. This will make sure that projects can be evaluated in advance and funds can be allocated with a more higher level of certainty. And also, this will enable downstream collaboration starting from the standard procedures identified. How do we do that is a question, of course, that also Carlos will address. But in our idea, we should aim for bottom-up minimum guidelines. And this will also demonstrate the possibility of self-governance by actors engaging in lunar resources activities by developing best practices, essentially. And then it's also fundamental that all participants to the campaign can also participate in the standard setting, so long as they commit to the final product. I think we have a unique opportunity to define a common level playing field on how do we identify lunar resources and lunar reserves and how do we explore and prospect them. And so it could be a great opportunity for all the participants to engage in this process, but then it also is the case that we will commit to the product that comes out of it to make sure that there is also a sufficient investment into the product that we're trying to develop. So to summarize the benefits of the suggested strategies, the idea is to, first of all, ensure compliance with the Outer Space Treaty in a way that is as less controversial as possible through inclusiveness and neutrality as to Article 1 and 2, cooperation and peacefulness as to Article 3 and 4, and then due regard and openness as to Article 9 and 11 on information sharing. This will also allow us to set positive precedents, demonstrating the flexibility of international cooperation with regard to lunar exploration, the possibility of being pragmatic with benefit sharing without having to renounce it or without having to burden too much pioneering operators, and then the critical role that standards and operators can play in the development of governance solutions for the moon. And then we took the liberty of identifying what could be potential next steps in the development of the campaign. But for sure, we can talk more about it in the panel and in the Q&A. The key message here is that we are here to support. We would love to see this happening actually, and hopefully we will be able to do that. And a coordinated campaign can really help us setting a new course for the moon, hopefully maintaining it as the province of all humankind. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Antonino.